Grass, the staple of the video game world. I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your planes. So when you're using this tri-planar method to make convincing 3D grass, I'm going to show you the best way to do it. So you can get the most performance and also the best possible way in which you can model these planes without hurting performance. So this is what I'd call the gold standard for video games. The 3 planes that basically are 6 triangles that make up some sort of triangular type shape, and you can position them any which way and you get this kind of convincing chunk of grass. This is really great, but it ultimately means that if you're running this in a game, you're going to have to duplicate these multiple times, and that's a lot of objects for your game environment. So there's ways around this. So if you're using Godot or Blender Game Engine, or you're using, obviously, Unity, you can merge these together and you have a big chunk of grass. Or you can have another thing where it runs a script, and then that propagates these little duplicate objects all over the place. So, for instance, a ray sensor that would detect the normals of the ground and maybe position the grass like this. If you're limited by performance, like I am in the Blender Game Engine, you may come up with some weird, stupid experiments. So, like I said, this is 6 planes, and sometimes a creative artist might think, oh, I could use triangles, just triangles, to make my chunks of grass. Like this, which is a terrible idea. So this is only 3 triangles. And you think, well, that's pretty great, right? Well, look at the bottom. So this travels all the way down to the bottom of the Earth. So technically, yes, this has 50% of the triangles, but when you're making planar grass in a game engine, you're being punished for the amount that is being shown on screen. Unless you have a specific object calling script or a specific functionality within the game's engine itself, using something like this, you're going to be punished for every single item that passes through that has to be calculated past these alpha walls here. And so duplicating this 4 times, just like we did with the other chunks of grass, technically now, yes, you have less triangles, so your poly budget might be happy, but you're being massively punished for all of this extra alpha that's being calculated. So this is what I would call a very silly experiment that sometimes people that first get into making grass for games might try to do and think it's kind of cool, but this is actually a terrible idea. Don't do this. So remember, your polygon budget is important, but you're also really being punished for how much screen space you use. So for instance, having this be very large or just increased in size, this punishes you because now you have a lot of alpha on top of whatever's being calculated behind it. So a bigger triangle is also more harmful, even though you're using less triangles. This leads me to my second to last, or my penultimate solution that I'm using for the shadows lengthen, which is an animated material on top of a large chunk of triangular shaped object here, so it can be duplicated and reused multiple times, and just planes that are being extended. So this is similar to the triangle effect, where I'm repeating the texture, but I'm only using 2 triangles, but I have these small gaps in between. So granted, I am technically being punished for any visibility that is being calculated between these gaps, but the overall benefit from the polygons is better because I don't need to use multiple objects to achieve the tri-planar effect, but at the same time I can get multiple crisscrosses, basically, crisscrossing of the planes, and this gives me a boost in performance by cutting down the number of polygons necessary. This does, however, limit the area that they can extend. For instance, they have to be repeating in a steady pattern. So, for instance, if you look at, say, this plane here, that's 4, but they're all equally spaced because you're extending the texture out. However, there's one problem. This is very poly heavy. This is 116 polygons. That's a lot of polygons for every chunk of grass. So this is my final solution, which is to just use a much wiser, basically a very smart placement scheme for these planes. So every single plane is being crossed over 3 times, and you get more or less the same amount of coverage as you do from this, except this is only 30 triangles. I should actually be more specific and triangulate this. This is 30 faces, not 30 triangles. Well, it's 30 triangles too, but right now it's 15 faces. So this is this is about a third smaller than this, so I could probably push this a little bit more, and then using level of detailing to improve the performance for the game engine. So for instance, if I travel a specific distance away from these chunks of grass, say here, we can switch to an identical mesh but with a different material that maybe isn't calculating both sides of the normals, like this, so you can still see the grass, but you're actually only rendering 50%. So in the shadows lengthen, this is the solution I'm using. It's basically a malleable triangle that is copying transforms from a global positioning script, and this way it's the most effective for the Blender game engine. So if you wanted to use stationary planes to calculate grass and you wanted to get a lot of coverage, this is a really effective way to do it, because you're getting multiple crisscrosses here, where you're getting that same triplanar effect, and you can obviously tweak this and get even more performance out of it to cover up specific areas of coverage and overall improve game performance. So for instance, from here to here I see 1, 2. These are basically two flat planes that are not receiving any benefit, and here. So this is something where I would probably get a little bit of extra life out of this by adding either a single plane or a chunk of grass in between these two here, and maybe changing its vertical scaling and adjusting it to cross over in the middle. So this does take a little bit of hand loving. You got to kind of love it and tweak it and get things to look the way that you want. But I've just added one more plane, so this is ultimately going to be 32 triangles in the game, which is a lot better than this, which is 116 planes. So once I put this into the game engine, I'll be receiving a large boost in performance, and I did this by calculating the maximum number of crossovers that I could get using multiple planes. So I just simply used objects and then aligned the planes to those objects to get the maximum number of crossovers, kind of like a little bit of a puzzle. Anyway, this has been my weird how-to for the Blender game engine when you're trying to use simply planes to calculate your grass. I hope this is helpful for you guys, and this is Tom signing off.